Everybody. First things first, it's not the agenda, it's actually, I've been told that you've got to select me as chair for the afternoon. I was nominated by the All Chairs meeting. Could I have somebody to nominate me for chair and somebody to second, please?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to
Thank you.
nominate you.
So I can now chair the meeting.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. When you said, I've been told you've got to...
It's been suggested that
I was nominated.
Thank you, Brian. You've been pedantic as usual. It was suggested by the All Chairs meeting that I chair this meeting, but that I have to be nominated into the position. Is that okay, Brian?
I'm fully in agreement, yeah, but I don't think that you have to be told to do something which has already been agreed by your colleagues.
Thank you, Brian. It was suggested, let's put it that way. Thank you. Brian's good on it.
Yeah, can I just ask for the questions, please, to be circulated? I haven't got a copy and I haven't signed the attendance register either.
Could you make sure that everybody's got one, please? Thank you. Right.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Welcome to this scrutiny meeting this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping items. One is we are being webcast, so if you can make sure that when you engage, everybody, you speak into the microphone and remember to switch it on. I'm pretty notorious at that myself. But the other thing is mobile phones, either switch them off or put them onto silent. Please don't put them onto vibrate because you can hear that as well. Thank you very much. And apologies.
Apologies received from Councillor Cameron, Crick, Giles Davis, Furzer, Harris, James, Alan Jones, Councillor Smith, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Tomlinson.
Mary Barnett? Councillor Barnett?
Could I ask if we could have Councillor Brian Moore be added to the list of invitees? He's not on there.
Okay.
Councillor Evans?
Could I also add Councillor Burnett's apologies to that list, Chair, please?
Thank you, there. Right. Next item on next item on the agenda: declaration of interest. Over to you, Derek.
Thank you, Chair. Having looked at the agenda, I'm not aware of any interest that need to be declared by members. Thank you.
Councillor Barnett.
Something arising, actually, I could bring it up under declaration under the former minutes, but it's appropriate to this meeting. Some of us declared at an earlier meeting that we were members of a credit union. You've got us down as appointees to the credit union, and there is a big difference, obviously.
Would you like to answer that one?
Well, whether that can be noted in the minutes that you've said that, Councillor Barnett, so that it's on record.
Thank you for that. If anything does come up in the meanwhile, we can obviously bring it up as we go through. I think otherwise, I think you suggested that that was probably the approach we need to take. Thank you. Item number 3 on the agenda is minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of February. If you'd like to go through it for accuracy, if you can remember that far back. Page number 1, page number 2, page...
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Small thing that I've already emailed Dominic about this matter, that my membership of Crosscarn Llanrhamon Community Council wasn't put in the Declaration of Interest. So it is now.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Page number 3. Page number 4. Page number 5. Page number 6. Page number 7. Page number 8. Page number 9. That's your lot there. Would someone like to move that, please? Second. Thank you, Councillor Davis. Sorry. Page number 1. page number 2, page number 3, page number 4, page number 5, page number 6, page number 7, page number 8, page number 9. Obviously nothing. So I'd like to move it again, please. Thank you. Item number 4 on the agenda, action sheet. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the first action point there, the responses to the joint committee that looked at delivering the Council's corporate plan, those were sent to you all yesterday, so you should have had those in an email. The second one, the responses to the collaboration joint committee, those were sent to all members on the 1st of July. And the final point there, which was some information from the Chief Legal Officer, those responses were sent to members on the 14th of May.
Any comments at all? Sounds like we're all satisfied. Thank you there. If no further comment, go on to the main meat on the agenda, which is item number 5, delivering the corporate plan, progress update on delivering the Council's improvement objectives. And that's over to you, Tom, isn't it? No. To you, Rebecca. Go on, sorry.
Richard Edmonds will be giving you an introduction and a brief presentation. Obviously, you can see here the chief officers are all sat around as per the last meeting. If you can try and keep your questioning in the order that the objectives fall, just to keep it in order. If I can just draw your attention to 2 changes. The first one on page 17, measure 4. The figure for 2012-13 should have been 8.33, so that would show that performance is improving, so that's not now a red item. Also, you should have all received a new, copy of page 84. Have you all got a copy of that?
Somebody hasn't.
Anybody hasn't?
That's what Thomas.
Okay. So if Richard Edmonds gives you the introduction, and then you're free to question Chief Officers.
Thank you, Bex. Thank you, members. Emphasis on the brief, really, by way of introduction. Just a little bit of history and setting the scene for the session that we aim to play out in front of you today. For those of you that don't know, we're looking at the 2013-14 forward-facing plan. That was agreed by Council over a year ago. It includes 15 improvement objectives. You'll be aware that's 5 more than the year previously. Those objectives are essentially things that need to be addressed over the short term, so improvements that need to be addressed over the short term, as agreed by Council. Typically, funding protection has been available for those improvement objectives. And essentially what we're asked to do once those improvement objectives have been identified is to determine what it is we're going to do to deliver progress and how we would judge that delivery to be successful. That's all set out in the report in front of you. If it's going to make life a little bit easier, Chair, I thought this slide may help. Essentially, the crux of the document is set out in both Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. We've tried to bring forward into Appendix 1 any areas where targets have not been met. That may help structure members' questions. Beyond that, you've got the full piece, the detailed performance assessment and the descriptions of progress that have been made. What I've also been encouraged to do by the newly appointed chair was to put all of this on one slide. This is the best effort I can come up with. What you've got listed down the left-hand side is each of the 15 improvement objectives. Then alongside that, under the section headed Performance Against Supporting Measures, an assessment of whether the measures chosen were green, therefore delivered, amber, somewhere in the middle, or red, not met. Anything white is either a demand-led issue, a milestone, or we have no data, and the greys you can ignore, they're measures that don't contribute. On the right-hand side, then, you've got the overall assessment for that particular improvement objective as set out in the report. And I know you've all, got a strong view on smiley faces and the alternatives, but it's always good to give an immediate insight into where we think things are. So what I'm going to do for the session, if it's helpful to members, is to leave that up. and then I believe the Chair is going to take you through improvement objective by improvement objective, and I'll leave.
Thank you very much, sir. That's the first time I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. We're going to start on the question sheet here. And we've got a couple of hours to play. Hopefully get this over by 4 o'clock with a bit of luck. I'm being smiled at here, but if you keep your questioning as succinct as possible, remembering this is a questioning session, nothing else. Thank you. I say that. Anyway, first question in is Councillor Evans. As ever.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep it as succinct as I can. Thank you very much. My question is relating to the take-up of the council tax benefit and reduction scheme. Not only is the performance indicator showing that we are down against target, but it's also down on previous years. I'd like some information. What are the reasons for this performance?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm beginning to wonder what alternative there'd be if it wasn't questioning, actually. That wasn't said before we arrived. I mean, in terms of the take-up, I suppose what we're trying to wrestle with is actually whether this is a negative, actually, or a positive. I mean, a couple of points I'd make. It's only marginally off previous years' performance and the target, and when you've got sort of 10,700 claimants, it's only a small number. What we believe is happening is people are moving from full council tax benefit into partial council tax benefit. We're also seeing in the wider welfare world working benefits such as tax credits increasing. We put an awful lot of effort into raising awareness of council tax benefit, online forms, surgeries in Blenavon, Pontypool and Cwmbran. So if this was a negative, it would imply that actually there's a latent demand out there that we're not capturing, and actually what we think is happening is that, you know, the economy is picking up and people are moving off council tax benefit. But I would say it's a very small number in the context of the overall, and we think they're moving from full benefit into partial would be the numbers.
Thank you for that, Nigel. I'm encouraged by that response, but do you think there is still, and though you say it's a small amount, do you think there is still room for improvement?
I think the question we're asking ourselves is actually whether, you know, is there still latent demand out there? Or whether we are doing as much as we possibly can to raise awareness. Now, we think we are, and actually what we're asking ourselves is whether the actual take-up of council tax benefit at the moment is, you know, starting to peak. So we're going to ask ourselves those questions because, of course, we've got the responsibility of paying out the council tax reduction support now. So if we start to see the claimant numbers peaking, whether that's through efforts that Dave Congreve is making on the wider welfare reform agenda, whether the economy is picking up, of course, that has a direct benefit financially to the council as well. I suppose the other interesting thing to think about in this, I mean, obviously we're going to have further very difficult settlements for the council. The council is a major employer, so at the moment I don't know when the balance of private sector picking up starts to then get pushed back down with actually the public sector workforce falling, and we could go back there again. So I think the question we're wrestling with is whether it's peaked and whether actually we should be seeing benefit take-up reducing as being a positive because people are coming off benefits rather than a negative.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody wish to ask supplementary at all? Okay. Next question. Question 2, Councillor Nigel Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 23, it talks about the benefit and money advice network. And so could we ask for two things? A brief summary of this service And also you state about it increasing its membership from 108 to 120. Could you tell us who are these 120, how they're made up, and what do they do? Page 23.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Dave Congreve, I'm here. The Benefit Money Advice Network is mainly a network of organisations, but some individuals as well that are associated with giving out advice on benefits and on money. So it's got all the major players that you would expect, like CAB, there are council elected members are on the network as well. It's increased, I think, because there has been more organisations that become associated with and wanting to support people who are needing to make sure that they're maximising. We know there are benefits that don't actually get the full take-up. So there's been a strong drive to ensure that people are getting access to the benefits of which they're entitled. If members would like a list, copy of the distribution list, then I can get that sent out from Community Services Unit so you can see the full list of membership.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Any more on that one? Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. I think we've all seen recently the curtailment of the money lenders. They're going to be restricted in the future. Do you foresee any uptake for advice with money matters because of this situation?
I think throughout the network, and I'm not a member of the network specifically, but from the information that I'm aware of from the Welfare Reform Group, because that group feeds up into that, what we're always advocating and what members of the network are advocating is that wherever possible, people who wish to get access to money would use, for example, credit union and other reputable organisations like that. Sometimes, because of personal circumstances, even credit union and similar organisations aren't able to help individuals, and that can be where they go to different loans. But we're hoping to minimise that with the advice that's given and with the support network out there. Whether we see an uptake, I think I couldn't say at this point, but if you would like me to ask for a prediction on that, I can see if the benefited man has got that data.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any more on this one? No, right. Question number 3, Councillor Jeffries.
Yeah, thanks. Why, when we are increasing the level of resources put in to help people access benefits, are we seeing the performance drop? If the take-up is dropping, how can we justify continuing to resource this service as we currently are?
I presume we're linking this to the first question. So I've sort of half answered the one. I mean, I don't think benefit take-up falling can be necessarily linked to performance. And we are putting a lot of effort into campaigns, as say, to make sure people are aware of it. Again, I'm not aware that we're actually increasing the level of resources. We've certainly protected the benefits area during the budget because it's been a member priority throughout the welfare changes. The benefit, the council tax benefit, which the take-up is a sizable, but still it's only one part of the equation. On top of that, we've got over 8,000 housing benefit claimants. We've got all the wider welfare reform agenda that we're managing, which has resulted in significant numbers of discretionary housing payment claims that have all had to be dealt with, all individually dealt with, which we didn't have before. And we have any number of changes in circumstances that have to be dealt with. So I think if you link the two answers, I don't.
Just to widen that then, you mentioned earlier that likely to be job losses in the public sector, so working families, they might lose one wage, they probably have a mortgage, they might be in debt, interest rates certainly seem to be going north in the future anyway. So are we fit for purpose? Do we have an organisational structure able to support this community to ensure that they don't slip further into debt and find their way back into healthier circumstances?
I think that probably links across with Karen as well as related. Yes, I think our benefits service, the network we've got with things such as the Citizens Advice Bureau, the way we work with other partners such as housing associations and the various organisations that Karen talked to, I think we've got a good network to help any person who is struggling. I think the point I was making was that as the economy picks up, we could. Our austerity is likely to hit harder now, so we will see, I think, public sector job losses. But yeah, I think we've got a network that's equipped as well as it can be, providing, of course, those networks that we help fund, we help support, in part we grant, and obviously the benefit service, that we try and keep those at a decent level as well to provide that support.
Any more on this one? No, right. Question number 4, Councillor Thomas.
Is our collaboration arrangement we have with Monmouth, with our benefits service, now proven to be detrimental?
No, I don't think so. When we first started the shared arrangement with Monmouthshire, we did notice a dip in Torvine's performance as we helped Monmouthshire avoid going into special measures themselves in relation to benefits. But now the performance has picked up and it's back to levels it was before, so we're not seeing any detriment now. Within that, though, we have got the benefits of some economies of scale. As we look for voluntary redundancies or even if we get into the land of something a bit more extreme than voluntaries, we've got a slightly wider base to spread it over, working with the two organisations. And also Monmouthshire contribute a management fee to us, which has helped with some of our ongoing costs. So I think it did cause a downturn in performance in the early days, but not now.
Okay. Question number 5, Councillor Mulvey.
Yep. So, Nigel, in terms of the measure of successful prosecutions, admin penalties and cautions accepted during the year, is that an accurate reflection of performance, and isn't the success rate a more accurate measure of performance in terms of the success of actually achieving a satisfactory outcome to a prosecution? And is it the case, perhaps, that the actual number of prosecutions is reduced and performance, therefore, is not necessarily getting worse? In other words, I think you need to know the number of prosecutions as well as the number which were successful and unsuccessful.
I think that's the pertinent point. I mean, we put the measure in, we put the target in, and then we have to live with it right the way through. Effectively, we've had no unsuccessful prosecutions, and this is an example of where the actual target set is wrong, and then you get a negative result. And the reasons why the numbers of prosecutions themselves are falling is we're putting a lot more effort into preventative measures, data matching, fraud referrals, single person discount reviews, and obviously we'll only take a decision to prosecute if it's in the public interest, and that's usually over £2,500. And what you're seeing is a lot of the fraud activities resulting in, they're a lot lower because they're caught a lot earlier, and they result in overpayments and then recovered in the normal manner. So I think, the target and the measure is wrong.
Just a quick one, if I could, Nigel. I mean, I noticed that the number of discretionary overseeing payments have gone up from 615 to 3,207. And yet you've been reasonably successful with most of your other measures as well. Most of the arrows are pointing upwards. How much of a difficulty has that been, all that extra work been on the department?
I mean, discretionary housing payments has been, quite a significant amount of work that's had to be absorbed alongside the other work. This is one of the benefits we've had from having, a wider pool of people with a collaborative service. But as you'll know from resources scrutiny, it was an important area that we make sure we got right. We're trying to cushion as much as we can the impact on the bedroom tax, but within the confines that discretionary housing payment is short-term support. It's not there to make up for the bedroom tax in perpetuity for an individual. So yes, a considerable amount of work falling on a narrower group of people, particularly Richard Davis as the Revs and Bens manager. We've had very few complaints. We've turned down very few, and we've had only a few appeals. But yes, it's been a spike in the workload, but I think the collaborative service has helped us, because obviously we've gone across the two authorities and called on a slightly wider pool of people than we would have to do the normal work, while a few individuals could cope with that.
Okay, no more on this. Right, over to objective 2. Raise standards of educational attainment. Question number 1 on this, Councillor Nigel Davis.
Thank you, Chair. On page 33 and also on page 34, some measures of success are using teacher assessments. Are we confident in the validity of teacher assessments?
Thank you. As we discussed at the last overview and scrutiny meeting, we're undertaking a piece of work with head teachers. In fact, it's tomorrow. We're doing the second of our meetings with heads to look at that very question. There are question marks that we have. There are question marks for us over the validity of the data. So the answer is yes. We've got some concerns. That's because our performance in Foundation Phase Key Stage 2 and 3 is clearly in advance of where we're achieving at Key Stage 4. Which you wouldn't expect to see. We'd expect to see the same level of performance throughout, or more or less the same. So head teachers have also recognised that there may be some issues, and that's an important thing to say. Lots of our schools have made very good progress, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that all of the good work that our schools have done is invalid. But we've enough cause for concern to go back and revisit that piece of work. So we're meeting, as I say, to look at teacher assessment and updating the methodology around the moderation of teacher assessment to make it more valid, or to ensure the validity of it. And we'll be meeting with all head teachers in September to come together to renew, or to update our policy and issue a new policy for all schools. So to give us that confidence.
Something on that. So, would you maybe be looking to that use a more accurate measure would be those from actual outside invigilated tests rather than pure teacher assessment?
That's one of the issues that we're looking at with schools. Clearly, there already are national tests available through the Literacy and Numeracy Framework. There were some question marks over the validity of that data at the moment, because it's very early on in the introduction of that testing regime. We have looked again, and we'll be looking at with heads, the reintroduction of the NFER, reading and number tests that we used to use in some years ago. So that's definitely an aspect of what we're looking at, together with a new moderation process that also involves head teachers moderating other people's work without them really knowing that having a random sample in effect. So we're looking at that and some other measures as well to give us the highest level of confidence that we can have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rees?
Just to supplement, will this standardised moderation, will that be going to each governing body in the local authority to make sure they agree and accept it? Yeah, in a word, yes. So obviously we'll prepare the policy, and then we'd expect all schools to adopt it. Where schools do not adopt the policy, our intention is to gather the best practice that we've got in Torvine, and we've got, as you know, some excellent schools in Torvine who Aston have said are excellent this year, and we have many good schools as well. We want to gather their good and excellent practice, combine that in the policy. Where schools or governing bodies don't accept that and don't adopt it, clearly that will raise a question about the leadership in those schools for the local authority. As councillors will know, the new National Model for School Improvement has a requirement for the local authority and the Education Achievement Service to look at the quality of leadership in all schools regularly. This would give us a question mark. It will then be, the onus would be on school governors and head teachers to say why they've not adopted it, and that they will have something at least as good, if not better. So they must be back on those schools, and we'll pursue those schools for those answers.
Is that okay? Councillor Barnett?
Yes, Yes, thank you. And perhaps for objective 2, I ought to declare that I'm a deputy on the board of the EAS. Could I ask, though, I see that I Learn Wales project has now come to an end, and we know that we have gained, and the whole world knows that we have gained probably a great number of computers, laptops, etc. Will we be having a report for the wider body of the Council, not just those on the learning community, on the success and the lessons to be learned in either direction from that project?
Chair, there was an evaluation report prepared, I think, Kevin, at the end of that project, and we can certainly make that available to the members' library. So I think that may have already been, if it wasn't circulated, we'll make sure it has been. Okay.
Is that enough on that one? Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, if I could ask, the one measure that is a decreased performance is the NEETs issue. I note that we've set ourselves a target of nil. Is this a sensible target, or do we think that it's just an aspiration and we're always going to be out on this one?
The important thing to remember when reading these figures and this report is that these figures relate to 12-13, not 13-14, because obviously the data for education is reported a year behind. So the target for NEETs is 1.5, and that's... sorry, I think you're referring to page 34, the second item down, and that refers to, the percentage of local authority care leave, in local authority care who leave education training workers without an approved external qualification. Is that correct? That relates to one child in that particular instance, and that particular young person was in a situation where we couldn't affect the change we would normally try to. So in terms of why is there a policy of having 0, I think that's our aspiration for all looked after children as good corporate parents, that we would never want any of our children to leave without those qualifications. So we always set ourselves that standard when it comes to looked after children.
Okay. Anybody else on education? Great. Next section. Objective 3, ensure learning for all children and young people. Councillor Mulvey.
Although 93.56% is slightly down on the previous year, how does that figure compare with other authorities? Because it seems pretty good to me.
Sorry, Brian, was that in terms of attendance, yeah?
Primary school attendance.
Yeah, in the particular year in question, we were clearly impacted by the norovirus, which saw a dip across South East Wales. So there was a change in trend. But again, this is historical data. What I can say to you is that the performance for this year, for example, is now up to 94.4 for primary and up to 93.5 for secondary. So historically, that was an unfortunate year. We saw a particular dip due to a particular set of circumstances that was matched across the region. This year, we've made significant gains in that position.
Any more on this one? I'll start with Councillor Evans and then go to Councillor Tom. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Recently, we've had a decision made that we will be penalising parents in the future if they take their children out of term. First of all, do you think, I would hope, that would improve this figure quite substantially? The second question is the money that comes out of these penalties, will that go back into the education budget, or is it going to be used for something specific?
Be careful about what we're doing now, because we were scrutinising the year before, not asking questions about current practice. I'm being careful about this. You answer what you can on this, okay?
I take your point there, Chair.
I think it's an important point because obviously it's so topical across the whole of South East Wales and across the whole of Wales at the moment. In reverse order, The money doesn't come and stay with us. We simply can recover our costs for the administration of the grants. So as we tried to make clear in Cabinet yesterday, any other money, any other funding returns directly to Welsh Government. There's absolutely no incentive for us, therefore, in issuing fixed penalty notices. Will it improve our attendance rates by itself? The answer is no. We already have a very clear, regimented approach to supporting families and parents who are finding it difficult to ensure their children attend schools. This would come near the point for us in our system where previously we might have had to consider prosecution and taking the parent to court. So I think it will be an added tool, but it's not one that we're looking to either see as a magic wand that's going to change performance. It's simply an adjunct to what we currently do, and we don't think it's going to make significant changes per se.
Thank you, Dermot. Thank you for your indulgence, Jay, on that one.
Taken. Councillor Thomas, and then Councillor
Chair,
Barnett.
page 37, if we look at the section there on managed moves, the percentage there is, the target was 90%, and our actual performance was 20%. Could you explain why there was such a dip in performance, and is there a connection there with the exclusions as well? Please.
In terms of managed moves, just to explain the context of those, managed moves are actually the responsibility of schools. They come about where school believe, and hopefully the family believe, that a young person's time in that school has come to an end, in that the relationships have broken down, and it's no longer in that child's interest to persist because they may be at risk of exclusion. We didn't have a managed move policy in place at that point, and there was some ongoing discussion with schools about what that policy should involve. That policy has now been issued to all governing bodies. It's been adopted by some. But even those who haven't adopted it are now working through the policy as well, and it is something that we're going to revisit in the coming year. Again, we have seen a significant improvement in the number of managed moves that have gone smoothly into time. And the time, I should also say, is something that we set ourselves as a target, that no child should be waiting more than 15 days for that to be concluded. That's been the biggest bone of contention with schools who feel that that may not be a sufficient time to ensure that the appropriate communication and planning is ready between the two schools. So I think that's particularly where we didn't reach target in that year. We now have a policy in place. We now, all the managed moves that we've looked at since that point, we've tried to aim for 15 days, but we've agreed with schools that we need to review that timescale, so that's come out of the policy. With that said, our view is to make sure that all children have consistency in their education and have a clear placement that the parents agree as quickly as possible, and in the next year's figures I think we'll be able to report that there's been a significant improvement.
Do you want to come back? Councillor Thomas?
No, thank you, that's fine.
Councillor Barnett?
Yes, I want to crave that you extend your indulgence to Stuart Evans towards me for a moment, because historically the only sort of recourse we've had with long-term non-attendance at school is ultimately to prosecute, which everything that involves, the counselling with expense, criminalisation of parents, etc. I wanted to know whether these fines will prove to be an interim step or in fact a disincentive. I've been following some of the responses from parents on the radio, and some of them have said, oh, if we're only going to be fined £60 a time for not sending our children to school, I'm prepared to do that a couple of times a year to send, to have cut price holidays because I'll save hundreds. Will we still be considering prosecutions for those where there is no other avenue open?
And the answer is yes. We clearly have a 26-week process that goes from, that outlines every step that we take between supporting a child who first doesn't attend on the first day, all the way through to potentially a court appearance. Now, clearly, in the vast majority of cases, we don't get to the end of that process because we intervene, support the family, and attendance improves. If a family choose not to send their children to school, they're choosing not to support their child's education. That is neglectful of the child, and we cannot tolerate that. Therefore, we will use every means open to us within the legislation to pursue good attendance for all pupils. So that means, yes, we will continue to use prosecutions in the small number of cases where that's required.
Okay, Councillor Karen, are you putting a coach and a horse through as well?
No, nothing to do with that. No, it was this. I wasn't quite clear from Dermot's answer about this new measure, the percentage of managed moved achieved within 15 days. No, I appreciate that's a completely new measure. You made a few comments about it and difficulties with the scores. Will this be in there next year as exactly as it is now with 15 days?
We're in the process. One of the things that I talked about yesterday when we looked at the performance review with Cabinet is that this document relates to a period of time that overlaps with when we went into special measures. We clearly need to look at and revise quite a number of the performance measures that we have within the education sections. So I think there's quite a number of revisions that are required in order that Council, Cabinet and Scrutiny get regular updates on performance in education that's meaningful within year, because obviously we're talking about, for us, a set of historical data now. So we're going to be reviewing all of the performance measures and looking to change those so that we can get a more accurate picture of performance within year to members for the start of the next academic year. That's one of the ones we need to review, but we've got a little bit of work to do with schools on that. Yeah. But it is, sorry, Chair, it is an important measure. And any pupil who's out of school for whatever reason or who's having difficulty between schools clearly would want to report on.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Dermot. I think I answered that well. Okay, everybody finished on this? Thank you. Objective 4. We did have a question, but I've got a note here. This question is no longer applicable, but Councillor Mills wishes to ask a question. Councillor Mills.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the question was actually written down incorrectly. It says that the percentage of looked after children who had 3 or more placements during the year, the target was 9. I understand the actual performance was now 8.33. Keith, can you just confirm that the fact that we didn't get to 9% is actually a good thing?
A lower figure is better because it indicates there's been less moves. So some moves, though, that are counted, I think I've said before to members, are positive moves, because a move to a permanent adoptive home is also counted within those moves. But that actually is that figure should have been shown as a green. It is a positive.
Do you want to come back? Any more questions on looked after children? Okay, thank you. Next question, Objective 5, support and protect vulnerable children. And number 1 is Councillor Robert Kemp.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the measure on 48 and the percentage of young carers known to social services who were assessed. The performance for 2013-14 has been considered to be poor and well below target. As the social care budget has been ring-fenced, why is the performance in these areas so low? And why has there been such a dramatic drops in performance? Please.
Okay. The support to young carers, there is one social worker that provides the support to young carers, and that's a part-time post. And I'm afraid that just working 3 days a week hasn't been adequate, to carry out the number of assessments that need to be carried out. I haven't been able to get an accurate number of those outstanding. I did try to do that this morning. But we will review the situation across the whole of the social care children's services workforce to see whether or not there's anything we can do within the broader workforce, but I'm sure members will also appreciate that demand for services is also rising at the same time, and we're having to prioritise the work as it comes through the door. So inevitably we prioritise the child protection referrals that come through, and those are the ones that are allocated. That doesn't mean we don't see the support to young carers as extremely important. We do, and for that reason we have made a bid for some additional resources which we got through the big lottery, which will help in terms of the face-to-face contact with young carers, and indeed will free up the carers support worker, the one social worker we have, to do those assessments, because at the moment she's having to do both elements of the work.
You'd like to come back at all? I would like to ask a question, if I may, from the Chair. What collaborative work are we doing with young carers with the voluntary sector?
We do some work with Action for Children, but that's particularly for young carers of disabled children, but nothing broader than that at the moment, Councillor.
Thank you there. Question number 2, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Keith, what I would like to know, if you could give us a brief summary of the outcomes of these young carer assessments.
They're many and very varied. They can depend upon the actual support to give the young carer relief in terms of their caring duties. But I think, as I've said to members before, sometimes it's very difficult to identify young carers. They're a hidden group. They don't wish to be identified. They find it particularly embarrassing. But I think many of the benefits of identifying them as young carers are that the work we do with our colleagues in education in terms of the pastoral care they can then receive, if you like, some understanding if they're late for school and so on, or they're having difficulties with their homework, and we'll have dialogue with that. But also in terms of giving them some absolute respite from caring from a sibling or a parent by taking them out to do some activities. And that is part of the role of this bid we've just put in through the bid lottery. There will be additional, if you like, social activities that these young people can engage in that they wouldn't otherwise be able to engage in. We did some work last year where we brought a group of young carers together, and it's an area where we've been slightly cautious because they're not a sort of homogenous group. They come from all over and from very different backgrounds. But in fairness, when we brought them together, the needs they identified were very similar. And the sort of things they were asking for were the sort of routine things that anybody else's children would do, like going to the cinema, going bowling, but being given those opportunities. So those are the sort of activities that we will do. So through those assessments, it's things like that. But also practical things. One young carer who said she was struggling to put out the big wheelie bin. So we liaised with our colleagues in neighbourhood services and organised, for I think it's called a doorstep collection, which was, things that once we know about them, there are things we can do. And it's simple tasks like that.
Keith, I'm sure I felt very privileged, as members you may have felt very privileged when we had a presentation of young carers in this chamber several months ago. And I think the work that they do is invaluable to this authority, and I'm glad to hear that we are supporting them as best as we can. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you for flagging that up, Councillor Evans. Anybody else on that one? Councillor Barnett?
As a caveat to that, though, how much attention do we give to informing those who are being cared for, whether they're parents or siblings, by the young carers and their families, that perhaps there are some alternative support for that kind of care, then giving, obviously, some diminution in the amount of care that the young carers have to give?
I mean, we make quite a lot of literature available through the youth service, through education, in terms of what is available. But also we do offer carers assessments, identifying the sort of services that are available. But as I said earlier, Councillor Barnett, many of these young people don't wish to be identified, and it's reaching out and touching them in a way that they feel that they're not being stigmatised in any way. So I think it's a collaborative approach through colleagues in education, in health, and the youth service is how we do it. But there's certainly a lot of literature. I noticed yesterday there's literature, within the Civic Centre saying how a young carer can get support.
Thank you. That's that one finished. Thank you. Objective 6, improve access to social care services. Question number 1, Councillor Robert Camp.
Can I suggest that all 3 of those be asked and answered? Because they're all interlinked, those.
Okay. Well, they're different people asking them.
Yeah, but I don't mind not asking it, frankly.
But there are different people asking it. That's the way we...
What we agreed that these topics would be covered.
Yeah. I'll get Robert Kemp to ask all 3 of them, if you want to, Robert.
Well, I'm concerned that the first question was put by Councillor Moby to begin with, so I don't know if Councillor Moby wants to ask.
Do you want to ask them?
1 and 2. Okay. All right, Chair. Okay, Chair.
Go on, Robert.
Okay.
Ask them, Robert.
This is in relationship to measure number 53, which was the number of referrals into community resource team. The first question is, in 2013 and 14, performance figures for referrals into the community resource team is significantly below 2012-13. Why was 2012-13 an exceptional year, please?
I'm not sure it was an exceptional year. I think what we've recently done is really tried to get under these figures and understand why there's been a change. The targets for this were set through the Gwent Frailty project, and we now believe that the figures that we've got for Torvine are unrealistic because they were done as a sort of a broad breakup of the figures that were coming into Gwent rather than breaking them down on population rather than actual. And also the way the referrals are now coming in, they're coming in, what they're supposed to be coming in through a single point of access, what is now known as the SPA. And we believe that referrals are being diverted to and not recorded, so that if a referral comes into a GP, it's not necessarily recorded as a referral, but it gets sent off for a service to be provided. So we need to do quite a bit of work around that. There are significant issues around the data that we have through the Frailty project, and that really probably covers the bulk of those questions that are written, that you're asking.
Thank you. And then question number 2, you can ask it.
On what evidence did you base the target figure of 3,500 referrals into the community resource team?
Well, I think I've just touched on that, Councillor Kemp, in terms of it was based on the figures from the Frailty project, and we actually think we need to look at the data that's now coming into Torvine and set our own target.
And the third one is, how many personnel are in the team? Are there capacity issues?
I don't have the detail of the actual numbers, but I can get that to you. I haven't got it with me. But we have no waiting list, if you like, at the moment. We're managing to allocate everything. There's no delay.
If you could give it to the whole of the members, that would be fine.
Right. Anybody else, any other questions on this? Thank you, Councillor Carroll.
I'm looking at page 53, the number of advocacy hours provided during the year. And I'm just looking at it and I thought, well, it doesn't seem to tell us a lot. We've come out as continuous. Am I looking at the wrong thing? Because when I look at this in last year's...
You're looking at the previous section.
Sorry?
You're looking at the previous section. No? Moved on.
Sorry, are we?
No. It's the same section.
Yeah, objective 6. Yeah. It's page 53. Number of advocacy hours provided during the year. I'm looking at last year's, and I'm not sure that I've got a complete match. But last year's figures are completely different from what we've got in there this year. I.e., for 2009, you've got blanks and blanks for 9, 10, 10, 11. Then you've got 11, 12 in as, this year's in 3,744. But in looking at last year's, I've got, and what I've got in front of me was last year's, when we did this work last year. The number of advocacy hours provided in 9-10 was 3,370. 10-11 was 3,120. 11-12 was 3,120. The target for 12-13 was 3,400. And then the actual performance for last year, 12-13, was 3,744. So am I looking at the wrong thing in looking at last year's? But it's got the same word in, it's roughly in the same place, in the same... Do you understand what I'm getting at? I'm probably the only one with this on my screen, but what I did was I looked up last year's.
I'll have to check that data for you back at the office, and I'll, if amendments need to be supplied, I'll send them out to all members.
Okay, it's just that I'm not sure I'm looking at and comparing apples with apples. And
Okay, we're going with that. Are you okay with that? Thank you. Right. Objective 7, question number 1, ensure people's needs are assessed in a timely manner and the care provided is appropriate. Question number 1, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know whether a response is captured regarding percentage of community resource team service users who felt that the goals and outcomes were achieved.
Yeah, sorry, I've located it now. Yeah, we did a survey of this, and we had, I haven't got the total number that went out, so it isn't exactly helpful, but we had 56 responses received back from the survey, and 89% of that said that the service they got was excellent, 7% said it was good, but 4% said it wasn't good. But on further discussions with the staff, I think what we're saying is that when they set the goals for these service users, very often they're quite optimistic that they will continue to make progress. But given the age and frailty of many of them, within that period of time, some become ill again or have developed different problems and different conditions, and therefore the goals that were originally set were not achievable. So I think we need to look at the whole way we set those goals in terms of at the beginning of that care plan when the intervention is started, because it seems to me that with that particular age group, or the majority of people in that age group, very often you're likely to see a deterioration rather than a long-term improvement. So I think it's one that really does require further examination. I don't know if I can be of any further.
Thank you, Keith. So how was that arrived at? Do you do it in a paper form, or do you do it via the internet? Or
no, the service users, I mean, the assessment's done by paper form when we actually visit the service user. We don't take out technology computers to do that, but it is back on within the office environment. It's electronic, but they are given a hard copy of their plan and those goals that are set, and they're set on an interagency basis. So they could be with an OT, a physio, or so on, whoever's working with that individual when they return to the community, or indeed if they're in the community. But I think it's about sometimes they're not realistic, because people will become, they deteriorate, or they develop another condition. I think if you're dealing with somebody in their mid-70s or late 70s, early 80s, or even later, sometimes yes, you hope that that's going to be the situation, and that's what everybody wants, but who knows what's round the corner, and sometimes people develop other difficulties, or other circumstances change within their family in terms of their own carers and so on. So I think it's one we need to give further examination.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you there. Any more on that one? Okay. Question number 2, Councillor Mills.
Yeah, Keith, you've actually touched on this already, but are the results skewed by the people's opinion on whether they receive the service they actually want as opposed to the service they actually need?
I think we have very open and honest discussions with families about that now. I think at one time it was very much people coming with a list of wants, but now because of the financial pressure or the demand pressures we find, not just within our service but within health, people are very clearly only given the services they need. And I don't think, if we look at the responses we had from the survey, I know I said I didn't have the full numbers that went out, but 89% saying that they were satisfied with what, so I think that's quite a high proportion. But that again probably warrants further examination in terms of the size and sample, but from what we have it would seem to be quite good. 89% saying it was excellent.
Okay. Any more on that one? Okay. Question number 3 is Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you please provide a brief overview as to how people's needs are prioritised?
Again, this is quite a broad one because it depends on the environment in which they're living. But I mean, if we take an example of somebody living alone within the community, we would assess what they actually need to maintain them within that environment for 24 hours. So whether or not they'd need someone to assist them in getting up, someone to assist them dressing, someone to assist them with a meal. So if they needed that level of support, then they would probably need several visits a day, and that's what would be provided. Obviously, there comes a point, though, within a package of that size, that the cost eventually becomes prohibitive. And whilst at the moment we don't necessarily direct people into residential care or nursing care, we begin to have those conversations, not just because of cost, but because of the number of people they would have coming through their front door, and sometimes the confusion that can cause. But a large package of care can involve maybe 4 visits a day, someone to pop in late at night to see that everything's all right. So it would vary. Somebody with less need, then, it could be a simple thing, going in, making sure someone's had a meal, making sure they've had a medication prompt. So, again, it really does depend on the needs that have been assessed. But there are many invariable. And I could provide, members with a whole sort of menu, if you like, of the different ones, because they vary. I mean, they are supposed to be individual. And they are, there's no two ways about that. But it also would be around the support that, if somebody's not living on their own, the support that you would give to a carer. It may be, if it needs 2 people to help move someone or so on. So, it's many and varied, Councillor Parish, and, but I'm happy to talk through it in more detail if you wish.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
We've had an offer in there, I think, about the numbers and the menu. Would you like that as part of the response to this? That would seem to be a good offer if Keith has got it available.
Well, no, what we can do is draw up a number of care plans and just give an example of the different services that we provide, both in-house and commissioned.
Chair, on that point, would that be for all members? Because I think that would be really useful.
I think it's excellent suggestion as part of this.
Well, it might be something members like to consider for a members' seminar. I don't know, for the broader members. Yeah, we could do it as a members' seminar.
That would be really useful if members think agreed on that. Because it puts on the bone, as it were. Thank you. Right, objective 8, ensure that range of quality of social care services is appropriate to meet people's needs. Back on this again. Question number 1, Councillor Mulby.
Yeah. Page 58, please, the third measure down, percentage of adult clients who are supported in the community. The percentage from 12-13 to 13-14 has gone up. It's above target, and yet the arrow is pointing down. Does that mean what it would appear not really to mean, that supporting adults in the community, the more you do, the worse we're doing? I would have thought the opposite applies.
We had considerable debate about this at the Cabinet yesterday, or the Executive Scrutiny event yesterday. And I would have agreed with you, Councillor Mulby, the figure used to be the more people you supported in the community, that would be seen as a positive. But it would appear that the way the service direction is going at the moment, and I think we need to relook at it in terms of whether this is a Torfaen unique thing or whether it is something we have had some discussions with Welsh Government, is that the number should be diminishing because of the number of short-term interventions that are put in place, so that I suppose it stems from some of the work from frailty, but I'm not convinced. I think we've started a whole debate about this yesterday around this one, and, if you like, for those both over 65, under 65, because the measure always was the higher number that you supported in the community was seen as a positive because it meant that people weren't going into either residential or nursing care. So I think, again, it warrants further investigation, because my view would have been the same as yours.
40 years of social policy gone down the drain, if it's the other way around.
Anybody else for any more? Okay. Objective 9, promote people's independence. Question number 1 on that, Councillor Evans.
Thank you again, Chair. My question is, do we have a breakdown of geographical locations of the young people engaging in restorative justice with ABCs? Sorry.
It appears we don't have anybody here to answer this today. So what we would suggest... Sorry? Oh, we do. Keith can answer it.
I could try and answer it. I did make some phone calls before I came today. This refers to the acceptable behaviour contract. I spoke to Jason O'Brien, who's the Youth Offending Service Manager, and I mean, I was asking why the figure had gone down, and he was basically saying to me that it's voluntary. You know, young people don't have to engage. There's lots of issues, but I'm sure we can get that data. It's by postcode or whatever. So if that's what you want, Councillor Evans, I'm sure we can make it available, and I'll speak to... It's Karen Kerslurk and Kath Nelson that deal with it in Torvine, but it's a joint thing with the Youth Offending Service. So I'll happily try and obtain that information for you.
Be really useful, Keith, and then here again for all members, really.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure Keith's going to be able to answer these ones as well, because I would... So,
I was just a clarification about the acronyms coming in again about ABCs. So it's an acceptable behaviour contract. Thank you.
Thank you there. Objective 10, coordinate people's activities that reduce antisocial behaviour. Can you answer these, by the way, Keith? We're going to get written results on this, because we've got nobody officially to answer them.
Well, I could answer them. It might not be the right answer. So, no, I think
I've got two questions here, of which I'm asker here. Number one is page 76 details the number of measures that have NA against the performance. Should we have an indication on how we're performing against these measures? And you seem the appropriate person on that. Our answer is actually get somebody from PSSU to answer them. That conduct. And the second one, which I will also quote out here, is the number of persons that receive housing-related support through the Supporting People programme due to domestic abuse as a lead support need is a large increase. Does this reflect a large number of those who need such a service receiving it, or does it reflect an increasing number of people suffering domestic abuse?
Yes, Chair. I thought it might be helpful, as we haven't got a representative from the PSSU here, rather than us do our best to answer these questions, if I arrange with Lyndon, when he returns from leave, to give written responses to the committee to all of these questions, would that be appropriate?
That was what I was told. That was what I was told. Because rather than make a stab at it, let's get written response that we can come back.
I'll circulate around the entire committee. Yeah, I'll
Thank
do
you
that.
there. Okay. Objective 11. Ensure that the local environment is safe, managed and maintained. And the first one of those is Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the measures, I was surprised to see this in there, that clean up your park days. I wonder if you could provide details to where these have been held in the past.
Yeah, the Clean Up Your Park days are days run by the actual Friends groups themselves. These aren't days that are run by the council. They're run by, for example, Pontypool Park Friends or Garnsucken Park Friends. The council supports them in that endeavour. I don't have a list on me today of all the 19. There were actually supposed to be 3 others that got cancelled, so I'll get a list together for you of those 19 plus the 3 that had to be cancelled due to bad weather.
That's great, Annie. I didn't realise that was the case. I thought it was done, a provision by the authority, but it's not. But I welcome that information, Dan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vec. As a supplement here, does that mean we're actually encouraging clean up your park groups?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah. Donna, will you consider working with Lantanam Conservation Society for Clean Up Your Park D in the future?
Sorry, which society? I didn't quite hear.
It's Lantanam Residents Conversation Society, Oakville, in Lantanam.
Yes, I'll get details off you.
Okay.
You've got details of a friends group, have you, in Lantanam?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Evans again.
Sorry, Chair, I just thought of this one. When you say parks, are we stipulating parks, or we could be talking about public open spaces as well?
Yeah, it's public open space as well, but it's where we've got constituted friends groups. So where there's a friends group that looks after a particular space, we support them in running their clean-up days, but we don't run them for them. Yeah?
You got me on, I just thought of these as well. Do you actually have a model constitution for them?
Yes. Yeah, we've got constitutions with the individual friends groups, and we can pull together a template if that would be helpful. Yeah.
That's very good, thank you. Okay, the next person is Councillor Evans again. You probably knew that.
Thank you yet again, Chair. In light of the recent storms that we've had, I've noticed throughout the borough there's large amounts of trees that have come down onto the highways. And I know in the past there's been a mapping exercise done of all the trees in the borough. I'm just wondering if that mapping exercise is still carried out.
Yes, we've got a system called EasyTreeve, on which we record all the trees in the borough, and they're risk assessed depending on where they are and the state the tree is in. An exercise was done a number of years ago to populate that database. Whenever we do anything with trees, we do update that database. So we always have a record of where our trees are and what state they're in.
Thank you, Donna.
Is that, I'm going to ask the supplement now because it's one of my favourite subjects, is that available on a ward-by-ward basis for ward members?
I think we can probably filter it to do that, yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I've seen the system. I'm not entirely sure whether we can, but I think we can. We can certainly do it by areas.
And it would be extremely useful if it was available on corridor basis for those of us who've got a canal going through. Sorry about that. Item number 3, question number 3, Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. The percentage of highways and relevant land inspected of a high or acceptable standard of cleanliness is actually 95.8. Can you confirm what is deemed as an acceptable level of cleanliness?
This is a national standard, and there's therefore a definition of how we measure it, which comes through from Welsh Government. It's quite a complicated formula because they actually grade our streets by A, B, C or D depending on what they find when they inspect them and also when we inspect them. And so this is measuring the number of streets that we have in a certain category or above, so it's basically B and above. What I can do is get hold of the actual definition for you, which then explains what they look for and how they categorise the streets depending on what they find when they inspect them.
Chair, if I can come back on that one, I would suggest if you speak to residents and tell them that the council thinks that 95.8% of our streets are of a high or a standard of cleanliness, I don't think they would actually agree with you.
It's not a figure that we derive, that we think. These are independent inspections that are held by LEAMS. It's part of a Keep Wells Tidy come out, and they actually do inspections of the streets. And it's a national indicator, so they assess every street exactly the same across the whole of Wales. But I can send you the definition, so you can then see what they categorise in each of the different bandings and what they look for in the street to determine whether it's an A, a B, a C or a D.
Councillor Evans, followed by Councillor Karen.
Just to say, Chair, that I would concur with what Councillor Mills has said. Residents in my ward they wouldn't think that that was cleansing as they would like it.
Councillor Karen.
You'll be pleased to hear it's nothing to do with street cleanliness. Page 76, right at the bottom, percentage of fly tipping leading to enforcement activities. Now, in 3 out of the last 4 years, we've vastly exceeded our target for 13-14. Is our target for 13-14, therefore, a little on the low side? Yeah, we intended to increase it for next year, basically.
Yeah, it could be. We had difficulties in interpreting the indicator. it didn't really comply. We checked back with Welsh standards on that indicator. We now think we've got an indicator that's real, and I think perhaps, given what you say, we need to review that.
Any more questions on this subject? Okay. Objective 12, deliver efficient and effective waste and recycling subjects. And it's Councillor Evans again.
I expect you officers are fed up with hearing my voice. But nevertheless, I'll answer, and members, yes. My question is, what number of complaints are we receiving regarding waste and recycling? It's a topic that comes up regularly to me.
The actual number of complaints that we're getting around the waste service is going down. We had a report this morning, actually. January to March, we received 12 complaints for the whole of those 3 months. We also received 11 compliments. So the number of complaints are going down, the number of compliments are going up. Now, these are formal complaints. This is where someone writes in and formally complains, and it goes to stage 1 or stage 2. We deal with thousands of service inquiries. So this is when someone rings up. It's not necessarily a complaint, but they ring up to make an inquiry about boxes, nets, querying issues, but it's not necessarily a complaint. Now, I haven't got that detail with me today, but if you want to know the number of calls I get through on heat, I can definitely get that for you, because we collate that information, because we monitor to see what sorts of themes are coming through and what we need to do to address those.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, again, Chair, I would appreciate that information, and I'm glad to hear that your complaints are going down, because mine are going up.
Thank you. Question number 2, Councillor Seaborn, you can have this one. I shocked him.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Recycling rates are falling. We are reaching a point where residents are no longer logging complaints and getting used to a continual litter. The issues are not being dealt with.
The recycling rate isn't falling. The recycling rate has gone up over a period of time. I think what you're looking at there is the participation. Is it the measure on participation? Yeah? Okay. Well, the recycling rate itself isn't falling. The recycling rate has gone up over the years. I think what you're looking at, if the question is about, is the actual percentage of residents who are participating in curbside recycling. That is a different measure. Effectively, what we have to do is every year we pick on 4 areas within the borough, and we go visit those 4 areas for a whole 3-week period, and we monitor who's putting out and what they're putting out during that time frame, so that we're able to do an indication. It is only an indication, because people could be on holiday, of how many people in that particular area are actually participating on the recycling service. But it's only a participation once in every 3 weeks. What we want to move to is people recycling and using the service every week or every fortnight, depending on the type of service that it is. So the black box scheme, for instance, we'd want them to use that every week. It's not true to say that figure is falling. Our target was 77, we got 81%. But I have to caveat that because we only look at 4 areas in the whole of the borough. So when we look at those 4 areas, we could have quite a big difference in those areas as to how well those people are engaging in the service in that particular area. What we then do is use that information to target that area to further encourage people to use the recycling service. But the actual recycling figures, the amount that we recycle, isn't going down. It's gone up year on year on year.
Yeah, Chair, if I can clarify something, because I was sat next to Councillor Cross at the pre-agenda, I think what she said was complaints are falling because people no longer complain because they just put up the rubbish and everything. I think that's what she was actually trying to say.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just information, really, Dana, about the take-up of the food caddy, because I notice in my area it doesn't seem to be used very much. I wonder if that's the same typically of Tovine.
I haven't got that detail with me, but what we do know from the consultation that we've just done around the black bin proposals, we posed a specific question around food waste, and what we found is that people were less likely to recycle food than they were to recycle any other material. So I think there hasn't been a great take-up on the food card. I can get that information to you, actually, because I've got it, but it's not with me. But yeah, so it's not as great a take-up on the food as there is on the other types of waste material.
Is there anything we can do to improve that uptake?
Again, we posed a question to the public to say what more can we do, and the results of that are going to go public today, actually, or no, tomorrow, as part of the scrutiny papers. There were various suggestions. Some people suggested we provided food caddy liners, but there were lots of other suggestions that people made. So,
could I just add something? I was along with Councillor Mills when Councillor Cross put that question in, and I think the problem was recycling, and people were complaining about the litter when the apparent litter when they were putting black boxes out, and that was and they felt the complaints weren't being met, and that was the problem, I think. So I observed that as well.
Do you want me to comment on that then? Yeah.
No. Okay, question number 3, Councillor Rees.
I think this is for Dana as well. 6% of households are not served by curbside recycling. I understand there are probably some good reasons why that is. However, I think the new sort of motto of neighbourhood services is nothing is impossible. If this final 6% was achieved, would this have a significant impact on your recycling figures?
No is the easy answer. It would have an impact, but literally 1 or 2%, and that work is ongoing now. We said that we would look at it's flats predominantly. There's about half of our flats, because 6% is only about 2,500 to 3,000 properties. It's not very many properties, and most of those are flats, and we're looking at those right now to get them onto a recycling service. But it wouldn't have a big impact on our recycling figures, no, because the number of properties are quite small.
Okay. Objective 13, ensure roads and streets are safe and maintained and clean. That's that one. I'll just ask. Yeah. Question number 1, page 87, percentage of qualifying children offered curb training in the academic year. How many children take part in the scheme? I presume that's... is that cycle training by the look of it? Or... curb training.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could clarify that. Curb craft training is a scheme for training 5 to 7-year-olds. Curb craft, for want of a better word, is pedestrian friendly, and how they cross the road and teach them good awareness skills. Currently, we are training up to 1,000 people. We change training for people twice a year. So currently there are 1,000 people that have been trained. And of course, we are continuing to train more. Thank you.
Any supplements on that one? Councillor Rees?
Yeah, just to be a bit more clearer, roughly we can say there's 1,000 children per cohort. So you're saying we're training a cohort every year, so that a child in primary education, are they going to receive this during their career in primary education?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rees. If the scheme will continue, which there isn't any reason to believe it wouldn't, we aim to train all children in all primary schools, 5 to 7-year-olds, curb craft. So the aim is for all schools to be trained, 5 to 7-year-olds. I haven't got the exact number of children that are in 5 to 7-year-olds, but I can make that available if you wish. And I can also give you a figure on the number of children we've trained up to date.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I applaud the curb craft. I think it's very, very good. It gives young children the first taste of the highway, and it's important, and it's a lesson, and hopefully it stays with them all their life. But my question is, and perhaps this isn't a question for you, maybe for Dermot, are the bicycle proficiency courses still taking place within our schools?
I'm not aware, Councillor, that cycling proficiency courses still exist within schools. My service area deals particularly with curb craft, so unless it's something that's provided by some other area, I'm not sure.
I think the answer is variable, and it depends on the school themselves as to what they believe. It's not a requirement of the local authority that they provide them, and some schools do and some schools don't. So we'd have to actually audit each of the schools and ask them to give us that information, but that's not a requirement we make of them.
Thank you both.
I would like to ask a question, is because it seems obvious we're spending an inordinate amount of money as an authority putting in green routes, and I was at a presentation with a school yesterday in my ward. The curb, they mentioned, when I think about it, they mentioned both curb craft and cycling proficiency. Certainly in the two schools in our ward, they do both. But there ought to be a linkage with it, because we've got a lot of cycle routes in this borough now. The two would apparently go together, but I didn't realise it wasn't a requirement to do the cycling.
Chair, it's also the case, obviously, that not all pupils can ride a bike or want to ride a bike. So clearly, it's for those pupils who do. So it isn't a requirement at this point. And obviously, head teachers would also point out that they have a number of conflicting priorities in terms of delivering the curriculum and raising standards. So that's an issue that each governing body, which obviously many members will be on, could raise as well. But certainly we could raise that through our meetings with head teachers and with governors early in September.
We are, I know it's not for this year in question, but we are being asked to contribute to the Active Travel Act, which is, that's what Mr. Whedon's department will know about, and that one of the requirements is getting people to walk and cycle.
Chair, I saw you walking with your bike yesterday.
Thank you, Councillor Mulby. At least you evidence that fact. Next item on the agenda after that one. Where are we? Question number 2, Councillor Camp.
Keeping on page 87 under the measure, the cleanliness index, could you explain what the cleanliness index is, please?
Yeah, I answered this question previously about the cleanliness index in terms of how it's measured. I'll send around the definition that we have about how we work that out. It's a combination of inspections that we undertake ad hoc and inspections that Keep Wells Tidy take. They've got a range, they've got bands A, B, C and D of how they grade our streets. They do random checks. They don't tell us that they're coming. They see what's on the streets. They then grade those streets, and that then results in our overall cleanliness. And it's the culmination of all of those things that results in our overall cleanliness index. But I'll send that round as per my comments to the previous question. Okay.
Any more on that one? Right. Thank you there. Objective 14, work in different ways to reduce our costs. Question number 1, Councillor Rees.
So I suppose this is for Nigel. Income from capital receipts through the disposal of surplus property is down 70,000 on the target. Why didn't we achieve our target?
I've actually thought, getting that close to the target was actually quite a good result in terms of planning capital receipts. I think we had some small receipts that went over the year end. I mean, estimating when a receipt is going to be in is pretty difficult, because sometimes we're delayed in advertising the land because there's some stuff on there when there are sites. Sometimes there are service requirements that keep certain buildings open for a little bit longer than we originally planned. Very often there are planning issues. Sorry, Duncan. Well, it is a difficulty in sort of estimating. So what I try to do is to manage it within the context of the capital programme rather than just an annual target. And for example, on 21st Century Schools, we know we've got to raise 17.7 million over that 5 years to achieve it. We've got £7 or £8 million already secured because members have done it, and we're fairly confident of the remaining 10. And what I usually do is whatever the asset management people tell me, if they say it's going to be in 14-15, I plan it in 15-16, because once the money's spent, of course, I've got to do it. So I think that was a fairly good result in that. But we have a lot of small receipts, and they just go over the year end, 31st of March. We've got one that's come in now in June, or about to come in, and we were expecting it last year.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, Nigel, if the County Hall one would have gone to surplus disposal, would that have affected this figure hugely?
We weren't expecting the County Hall disposal during 13-14 because the demolition finished towards the back end of 2013. We're hoping that goes to market towards either the end of the summer or early autumn. We're just trying to finalise one or two things arising out of the demolition so that when it goes to market, we don't have developers saying there's X, Y, Z issue on that site and then discounting the value more than it actually would cost us to put it right or to identify it with a solution. So that's one of those where probably 12 months ago I would have said to you that will be out to market now, but by the autumn it'll be out.
Any more on this one? Okay, it's me now. Question number 2. I've got a basic question here. Why aren't we taking advantage of solar energy? We've got a couple of buildings already that do take advantage of green buildings in the authority's ownership, which is the power station and the Straw Bale building. But the general question was, with a lot of other buildings in the authority's ownership, there's, have we examined using alternative energy sources on all those schools and on all the rest of the estate? Question there.
Thanks. Yes, there have been some buildings, as you quite rightly say, that we've taken advantage of this on some of the buildings in the borough. And there are a couple of reasons why certain things haven't been perhaps pursued to do this in a greater way. There was a decision at a previous capital board taken that the priority allocation for capital funding was going to be for the 21st Century Schools programme. And also we took into consideration that as a result of Williams' Commission, there would be rationalisation possibly of council buildings, and that it may not be appropriate at this point in time to invest significant sums into some projects where the payback can be over a 10-year period. So we can look to prioritising investor save schemes in that area, and we are looking at resource efficiency in other ways. So I can get further details from the relevant officer if councillors wish more details than that in the response.
Thank you there. Does that actually include installation as well? Because that's the obvious one that would be fairly cheaper to do.
I can take that back to the officer who's got the detail.
Thank you. Question, anybody else on this one, by the way? Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on that, I'm surprised to hear the point you're making about that if we were to collaborate that income generation wouldn't be coming forward. But with the private sector, you can transfer that income, the feed-in tariff, and I would have thought it would apply to anyone.
Sorry, I thought the question was in relation to our buildings, and I thought, sorry, the point that I was making was that we could have invested as a council in something expecting to get a payback, but if it was over a 10-year period, it may be that we wouldn't be perhaps in receipt of that, and it would complicate the situation. I'm sure that could be re-looked at, but we do need to stand by at the moment the Capital Board decision that the priority investment is 21st Century Schools as well.
Thank you.
Maybe that does need to be revisited, because we are trying to encourage businesses and domestic people to go down that line, i.e. the sort of things like the scheme that's going with the credit union at the moment. There's and I presume there's national schemes on that one as well. I won't belabor the point, but it might be worth somebody looking at that. Question number 3, which is sort of related, and I think certain sections of the council are doing it already. They probably give us a reply on this one. Have we explored options for increasing income?
I mean, during every budget round, we see proposals coming forward from services either to look for new income streams, neighbourhoods have had a few of those, or increasing fees and charges. But as members will also know, we also get a lot of questions from the public and members in terms of justifying those increases. I think as we go forward, probably what we need to do as a council is to look at our overall income and subsidisation policy and actually ask whether members would rather people pay a little bit more for some services rather than actually lose services. But of course, one of the big income areas, of course, was leisure, and of course that has now gone to a trust area where there was quite a lot of subsidisation.
Are there any other views for other officers on that one?
Say that we introduced charge for rats, and we've had quite a backlash off the public and some members on that. So increasing charges or introducing charges is not necessarily. I've got an interest in this because 25% of the income for public protection is fees and charges, and it's difficult. People don't like it.
Councillor Karen?
Yeah, could I ask, Chair? Page 92, number of council employees equipped to work on a flexible basis. I mean, it was quite a dramatic and good improvement we saw, 600 to just over 1,000 in 12-13, yet it's gone down. Is it considered that we've perhaps hit like a watershed with this one? That we can't go any further with it?
Chair, if I could take that one. Yeah, a bit of an interesting one, this one. The 1,200 laptops were initially bought as a sort of opportunity to pump prime and move from flexible or fixed desk working and the desktop machines that we used to have to try and encourage people into working more flexibly. Obviously, there was an initial peak as things took off, but what we've seen over time is that's steadied. And the reason for the sort of diminishment in performance is relatively simple. We've applied a record card as per the advice and guidance of our Wales Audit Office, which sets out explicitly how to calculate this data consistently year on year. In doing that, we've identified that the list we'd reported previously included a number of duplicates, born largely of a machine being given to an individual who potentially left the authority, coming back into the pot, being allocated again lower down the list, and effectively being counted twice. So the application of the record card has cleansed that data, and I think it's more a case of the current figure being absolutely accurate than a diminishment of performance against that which was reported previously. So what I would point out as well is, whilst this was given to try and help flexible working, what we've seen subsequently is that it's taken off. So lots of other service areas have started to buy laptops as a matter of course. They've not relied on this particular 1,200. And certainly the number of employees that are working flexibly across the council at the moment would be much in excess of that.
Right, so basically what you're telling me is that this actional indicator is not a particularly good indicator then?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
So we're going to see it taken out for next year?
Interestingly, it's not one of the improvement objectives for next year, so it effectively has been taken out.
Thank you there. Right. So we're all okay on those on that one. Reducing our costs. Thank you for that one, Councillor Cowan. Right, objective 15, transfer educational provision for young people aged 14 to 19. Question number 1 is Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chairman. Turn over page 93 and the success in projects which are related to reducing NEETs that have been externally funded. How do we ensure that this work can continue should external funding cease?
Thanks very much. Yes, it was something when we talked about two members, a lot of the provision that supports NEETs is grant funded. That continues to be the case. We have got provision in place to the end of March 2016. With some provision, obviously there is some core funding that exists as well. However, we have got a particular dependency on European funding, ESF funding in particular. And just this week, the Executive Member for Resources approved the underwriting of some provision to retain a core team of people, not a whole project, but a core team of people to make sure that we can address the needs recommendation and improve the situation for our young people in transition post-16. We are actively working with our neighbouring authorities, the other 9 authorities in the South East Wales region, to put together collaborative proposals for the next round of ESF. So I think in looking at the resources that we've got, that we can, where possible, bend, looking to prioritise work, schools doing much better early intervention work as well. We would hope to see that the additional resource doesn't need to be maintained at a particular level, but without a doubt we are just having to do as much as we possibly can as officers to seek future funding at the moment. But as I say, the Executive Member of Resources has approved for us to maintain a core group of people that are very key to this to the end of this financial year.
Any supplementary questions on that one? Thank you. Next question, question 2, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair, and you'll all be very happy to know that you won't be having another question off me this afternoon. And that's in relation to, if you could give me a bit more background information about the regional and local priorities as mentioned in the measures.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Councillor Evans, which measure you're referring to?
It's on page 93.
93. All right. Okay. Yes, the Regional Learning Partnership is the partnership which is starting to emerge across the 10 local authority area. It has officially now named itself as the Learning and Skills Innovation Partnership. It's chaired by, it's got membership of HE, FE, the councils, Richard Crook, who is the Blaenau Gwent Director of Environment and Regeneration, is the SUDA, which is the South East Wales Directors, which is the group that oversees our progress, as I was saying, in looking for European funding and other regeneration opportunities. So the partnership has constituted itself in the sense that it has a core group, it's working on its terms of reference, it's got very good links with City Region, so they are, through that group, we are looking at developing the regional priorities which are required. There's a document that is required to be produced by DFES between sort of the October and the April period. So that will be the regional priorities that were being looked at, which have now been, the document is required by DFES. When we first started and when this was first written, it was about us setting up a regional partnership there. That's happened, and since then DFES have come through and said there is an expectation of a particular regional plan.
Thank you. And the local priorities as well?
The local priorities are those pretty much that are contained within Corporate Plan 2, and also the learning priorities, for example, that are required by, for example, Coleg Gwent and the Adult Community Learning Service, which again are the priorities which are set by Welsh Government pretty much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anybody else got a quick one before we finish this line of questioning? Councillor Karen?
Yeah, page 96, number of percentage of pupils in local authority care and any level authority, blah, blah, blah. And it looks as if it's exactly the same one as the one I asked the question about on page 34, because it's got exactly the same stats in it all the way through. But on page 34, it's got a downward arrow, and on page 96, it's in there as an equal. And if there is any difference, I don't understand it, and it's exactly the same.
I think that is the same. It's because the same performance indicator is required in a number of different objectives. So I think that is I'm pretty confident that's a direct replication, because we covered that again in our session yesterday.
So we can alter the little sign at the end, so that they're the same?
I think they are.
Okay, are you all finished that line of questioning? Good. Right. Just as a bit of a summing up, I've got a couple of questions here I'd like to go around the offices with relationship to this, what the year we're talking about. And the questions are, and you've got a few minutes each, so don't sort of belabour it too much. What are we measuring the right things? Are these performance measures helping officers and teams to perform better? And our targets being set in the right way? And if you could start with Richard. Sorry, Richard, I'd start with you if you like. Just give it a few moments consideration. Just go around on these questions. Should I reiterate these questions again? Or are you happy?
No, I think I got the gist of them, and probably by coming to me, you may have superseded the need to go to everybody else in turn.
I just thought they all like the same.
Yeah, well, they may, and far be it for me to suggest no one else wants to join in.
It's a question time, I'm sure you've got something to say.
I think it's fair, members, to suggest that on the basis of what you've seen and heard this afternoon, it would be remiss of us to think that we are measuring the right things right across the piece in every particular arena. I think from the performance that's reported, you'll see that we are using the data to drive improvement in many places, but not all. And I think in terms of whether we can do better at setting our targets, yeah, absolutely. I think I speak on behalf of everybody. But what we've got to reflect on in terms of what's before you today and what you see in other performance reports is that this is a maturing system. Every time we go through one of these sessions or we think collectively about how we should be managing performance, we get better at it. We had a very good session yesterday with Cabinet, a new initiative that we're trying to progress across the organisation that again challenged us to think differently about the way that we record data and we set targets. And I think all of that is a sort of It's a matrix of things that we can use to try and make sure what we provide you with is absolutely on the money. You know, it drives improvement in the right areas, we measure it appropriately, and it helps us to make sure that our business is delivered properly. And I think a fair assessment of what's before you today is we do that to a mixed ability, but we're getting better at it every time that these sessions come around. I don't know if colleagues want to chip in, or feel free to disagree if that's not the case, but that's certainly my view.
Chair, I think for education, clearly we've been through a very interesting time over the last year or two. And clearly, as Council, we've recognised that we have a lot to do in terms of improving outcomes for children and young people. And that necessarily means we need to change the way that we monitor our own performance and that we report on it regularly. So for me, the format at the moment doesn't cover all of the areas that we need to cover, and it's not necessarily measuring the right things. Clearly, we've done a lot of work with the Recovery Board and with and internally, and together with the Recovery Board in reshaping where we need to be with education over the next 18 to 24 months, and that needs to get reflected now in a new iteration of this document for our education, and that will require some change.
I think broadly these sessions are very good, and it raises quite a lot of questions and things that we need to go away and find further detail and refine. But I think one of the things going forward will be when we're doing less or providing less services, we're going to have to think about how we report on what we're not doing and the impact that may have on service users and the public generally. So I think there's a whole other area that we are going to have to look at how we prioritise what we're doing.
Nigel?
Just a couple of comments. One is about currency. I mean, this is current 2013-14. Obviously, we get reports from external regulators, which is only 12-13 at the moment, and I think that causes some tensions as we report back, because you've got different information, and we can't help the regulators, so this is positive. There's some. I mean, I agree with everything that Richard has said. I think there's something about tolerance as well. You know, sort of a bold red and a down arrow on an indicator that's just marginally off perhaps we need some kind of sort of tolerance. I wasn't necessarily thinking the capital receipts, I was thinking the council tax benefit then. Sorry, Councillor Rees. But you see what I'm saying, a percentage within, a target, perhaps a degree of tolerance, because it's showing up as red when really you're near enough there. And then the point that Keith made, I mean, it's going to get far more difficult as we go on. We're not going to be able to do everything to the same standard as we are now. And perhaps we've got to be a lot clearer as a council of what that is, what that impact is, and then the performance measures reflect that.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I could, I'm speaking on behalf of Christina Harry here. Christina is very performance-driven. Regular meetings we hold with the senior management team to talk about performance and how we perform as a department. One of the main things for me is in the highway maintenance area is that we've been reliant on local government borrowing initiative, and these initiatives come to an end. So when we talk about performance and cleanliness and maintenance of highways, a lot of it is driven by the local government initiative. So when we look at performance, we as a department have got to look at the amount of money that we have to perform well.
To add, and it picks up on what other people have said, again, some of our measures were shown as red because we met our target, but it was a slightly reduced performance on what we've done previously. But that's indicative of the fact that we're reducing resource. And so it may be going forward in terms of setting our targets on certain of the measures, we're going to drop our targets. And that has to be acceptable to members. Members will have to sign up to the fact that we're needing to drop our targets because of the level of resource that we've got.
In largest part, public planning and public protection don't figure in this. We're largely statutory services and we don't fit into the corporate priority mould, if you like. But the stats that we, and the background, the performance is still very important to the public in terms of turnaround and planning applications, inspection of high-risk premises, those sorts of things. So you may want to think about things that fall outside of the corporate plan priorities that you want to know about. That's all I say.
Right, thank you very much for your contributions. Councillor.
Yeah, I mean, on the back of that, last year, and I realise that we've increased the number of issues that we're looking at as part of the improvement plan. But last year, we judged our performance on 68 indicators, and this year, we're doing it on 131. Do you have a view that next year that perhaps we need to do a little bit less to achieve a bit more?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting balance, this. When we looked at the previous year where we had 10 improvement objectives, we were advised by the Wales Audit Office that we didn't have enough indicators to be able to give a balanced view of our performance against each objective. So they encouraged us to put forward more measures. I think having seen that, this year against the 15, what's come forward is having more measures to measure doesn't necessarily provide, the right stimulus to improve. Obviously, next year we're dropping back from 15 measures to 10, which will be immediately helpful. And I think we've got a role as a leadership function to ensure that the measures that we include do provide a good indication of what we're trying to achieve and are a balance between measuring too much and measuring too little.
Councillor Carrigan.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that. I mean, one of the things that worries me about this is now going to be published. The general public will be looking at it. We see this huge increase in performance measures. This year we've got 53 showed improvement. Last year 46 showed improvement, but that was out of 68. So then we've got 10 showed a decrease in performance last year, whereas 27 showed a decrease in performance this year. And it does worry. I mean, I personally do not believe that we are performing worse than we were last year. That's my considered opinion. However, these indicators appear to say that we are. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm not entirely sure. It's a comment for me personally to make, and members of the public will all have their perceptions of how we're performing. I guess what this is a direct response to a request from a regulator to do things differently. In terms of workloads, these are, what you're seeing in front of you is effectively the tip of the iceberg. All of our service plans and team plans contain a huge number of measures. All we've done is surface some more of those as part of the forward-facing plan. So it's not more work for us by way of capture, but it does, I would agree with you, it could be misleading in terms of the performance that the Council has made. We may need to look at perhaps percentages of improvement rather than the number of measures. That may be a better view. But ultimately, people will draw their own conclusions, and we'll do the best we can to present the data in a way that's meaningful and accessible. But I think every one of these sessions that we've had, we've created another thing we might want to consider to make the presentation of the data a little better. So we'll continue to refine, but I take your point entirely.
Are you satisfied with that now, Councillor Count? Thank you. Everybody else happy? Well, ish. Thank you. Right, well, thank you very much, officers, for coming and sitting through a couple of hours. It's 3:30 now, and thank you very much. You may leave. We need to sit here for another 5 minutes or so and have a conversation about what we say. Thank you. Right, where do you want me to go? Right, where do you want to, where do you want to go with this? Right, everybody awake? Good. What the suggested scrutiny activity was, members are invited to consider, number one of that was, members are invited to consider the information contained in the appendices to report to assess whether service areas have made sufficient progress in delivering the 15 improvement objectives as published in the 13-14 forward-facing improvement plan. And number two of this was, in doing this, members are invited to make clear comments or recommendations to the relevant executive members and or chief officers where they feel the self-assessment information as set in the Appendix 2 needs to be strengthened before it is included in the Council's 13-14 performance report. I'm just going to make some... would members like to say anything before we make some observations? Mary?
Yes, one thing I think we could consider for the future is that we need to have some information on where the way in which the outcome is measured has changed from one year to the next. I know that's happened in certain areas, like how you account for school absences if a school has been closed because of snow or kept open because of snow, that kind of thing. The definition of NEETs has changed slightly, which has made, a favourable improvement, I think, in that children, young people on a gap year, I think will be the same as England. They will not be counted as NEETs, which they were before in Wales. So we have no indication there of those measure changes that could have affected the way we report.
Thank you. Any more? Right, would you like to go through what you've drawn out of this?
Clearly, going through all the objectives, there was quite a number of requests for detailed information, and I think Becky's going to list them one by one in a minute. But as far as key recommendations are concerned, I think we kind of drew them out towards the end of the meeting. It's clear that we're not always measuring the right things. I think everyone seems to be in agreement with that. it seems quite clear that we're not always setting targets correctly. That, the fact that some officers can't even be sure whether the target should be going up or should be going down. This sort of thing really needs to be drawn out. It's confusing for us, it's confusing for you guys, it's definitely going to be confusing for the general public if we can't be sure which direction of travel we're looking to take. And finally, there was a comment regarding tolerances around whether things should be red, amber or green, and if members wish to recommend certain tolerance levels plus minus 5%, so we can be clear about what we're talking about when we say something is a red, an amber or green, then that would be a good recommendation as well. Any comment?
I certainly agree with what you said, Tom, about the tolerance levels. It'd give us a better stance to go on, wouldn't it? Whether it's just achieved it or it's way outside it. I think that would be useful both to us and to members of the public. It would be much clearer.
Any more on that?
Process. I think we've identified a few tweaks which are needed, and I think as a general rule, where there are numbers, there ought, where possible, to be percentages as well, because numbers alone don't necessarily give an indication of volume. In terms of the number being dealt with, the one I mentioned, I'm not saying because I mentioned it, but quite a few indicators needed to have a percentage in order to know whether it was an improvement or failure. What I'm keen on, I suppose, is that as we've got this joint approach, that the 5 scrutiny chairs perhaps can take this further by going through in detail to engage the executive members, perhaps, with those changes which they feel have emerged from this meeting and from the meeting that they would hopefully have supported by officers. That seems to be a good way of doing it. I know we've got a members' seminar on Monday, which Nigel and Richard are dealing with, about improvement objectives. Whether they deal with performance indicators in the same way at that seminar, I'm not quite sure. It would seem, well, I think it's a more general question about improvement rather than what we've been dealing with. But it just seems to me that we've got an opportunity now to get the attention of the executive to the fact that there are problems with these performance indicators and they really need to work harder to give us measures which actually are more meaningful. And within that process, they can look at the question of what is achievable realistically and perhaps introduce a range. But there needs to be that sort of engagement, I would have thought, because they're likely to be fairly defensive, I would have thought, because if they're judged on the basis of whether the arrow is pointing up or down, then they'll want as many as possible pointing up and as few as possible pointing down, even if there is a bit of confusion about whether down is up or up is down. So I think we should simply suggest for the moment that the 5 chairs, 4 of them are here, I think, so hopefully they'll at least take it on, we could ask that they meet with appropriate executive members with a view, together with the appropriate officers, obviously, with a view to the executive taking on board the comments that are being made and helping to come up with the right answers. And I particularly would like one, and I know this is really difficult, but I would like someone to give a lot more attention to whether or not we can have up-to-date figures in relation to education, because it always seems to be a year behind. And I know we've got to do it as far as Wales Audit Office is concerned. We've got to show it in the financial year that is appropriate. But when we're actually considering performance and whether or not a department is doing well or whether schools are doing well, then we need to have that information. And like we know, I think Glyn mentioned he was concerned about NEETs earlier on. We know, as a result of information which isn't contained within these figures, that meets have been improved outstandingly in the last few months. So, it would waste an awful lot of time if we were discussing a problem which has already been resolved, is really what I'm saying.
Jeff?
I know it is the practice in most scrutiny committees now to have sort of expert witnesses to sort of challenge the officers a little bit. I'm just wondering whether having somebody who's an expert in performance measures, whether that would focus the minds of the officers a bit more later on.
I want to beg your indulgence. I agree with what you're saying about this lag in the system, because it's frustrating me, to be quite honest. We've got modern electronic equipment. We've got a whole lot of people producing data. Surely it's not beyond the wit of them to have the data a lot more up to date, because they must, if they're measuring it on a quarterly basis with the with the software system we've got, they should be able to produce this at least 6 months behind, not 2 years behind, which is what we're looking at.
Don't miss the point, sorry, but the point is we've got to produce information in a certain form in order to meet Welsh Audit Office requirements and Welsh Government requirements. So it has to be as it is, until we can change the way in which they collate and review that data. But when we are discussing performance based on those figures, we need to be updated rather than go up blind alleys saying, we need to do something about NEETs or whatever, rather, when in fact it was significantly improved last year, but those figures aren't yet part of the 2013-14 data set because we're not allowed to do it that way. But we can know that, we can have that information and react accordingly.
I take your point totally, but what I'm trying to say is they've got obviously accurate data for audit points, but you also have kind of management data, which presumably is a lot more up to date.
Yeah, but it has to be in the form it has to be. That's the point I'm making, isn't it?
Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Morby kind of answered his own question there, but just to add to that, I know Dermot is working with the EAS at the moment to work out how to produce termly performance reports for schools, and he's also working out how that information then can be sort of disseminated amongst members. So it is in hand. But going back to Councillor Morby's original point, this backward-facing performance report is a statutory document. Yeah. We have to publish it in this certain way, so therefore we are kind of hamstrung by that process.
Karen?
Two comments I'd like to make, and it comes back to that page 34 and page 94 where we had the two different, we had it reported twice. Yeah. And on page 34 it was a downward arrow, and on page 94 it was an equal. And it's because it was one pupil. Yeah. But when it was recorded on page 34, it was 4.17%, because it was a percentage of the number of pupils, which has obviously gone down, and it's 5.88. So they're saying as a measure it had gone down, but it was still only one pupil. Yeah. So it was measured, you have to have a sensible benchmark to work from. And obviously whoever inputted that detail on 34 didn't know what they were inputting, but whoever done it on 94 had an idea. And I'm the right one to talk, because I mentioned it in 34 and I knew what it was, or I should have known what it was because I asked the question about 3 weeks ago. But one thing I would like to make as a second comment, last year we made quite a big issue towards the end about benchmarking data should be made available to all members to help them assess the Council's reporting levels of performance. I realise that we have to report this in many respects in the way that we do, but nowhere does it tell us it tells us how we compared with last year and the year before, but it doesn't tell us in any way how we're comparing with other authorities. And I think it could be important for us next year when we get this, if we could have along with it some sort of benchmarking so that we can see how well we're doing in relation to others. Because many of these are national indicators, so it isn't beyond the wit of the officers to supply us with that information. And even if it's not in there, there could be an appendix document that would allow us to see that difference in data?
Take your last point first. This is going to be the appendix to the performance report. There will be a section within the performance report, and it has been picked up as a deficiency within previous performance reports that we're not doing more benchmarking. There is going to be a section whereby we highlight service by service how each service is benchmarking, essentially. Going back to the other point about the different colours for the same measure, effectively, I think it was probably me for both instances, but I was probably wearing, I don't know, different hats when I did it. But, so apologies for that, but it is a draft document, and it's part of the scrutiny challenge to actually highlight these issues. So noted, and I'll make the amendment.
Right, what are our recommendations that members can hear? Well, what are we suggesting as recommendations?
Well, going back from where I began was ensuring that we're measuring the right things, ensuring we're clear on which direction of travel we're taking, ensuring that the targets that we're setting are the right targets and actually driving improvement. Councillor Barnett highlighted the need to point out where measures have actually changed during the year, so we're actually making fair comparisons year on year. And we also discussed the need to include tolerances as well within setting the red, ambers and greens. Clearly there was, as I mentioned earlier, massive amounts of requests for further information, which I don't know if you wanted to go through them, but Bex has kind of got them all down. Did you want to actually go through them, or just accept that? What
we do is put those in the report back, and if members have issues, come email back. Is that okay? Okay, is that way to do it? Otherwise, you could be here all afternoon, I suspect. You'll look rather.
Sorry, can I ask, Doug, you put something in to say that in future reports, where we haven't met the target, it's not always a bad thing. Like the instance I gave of looked after children, whereas it's showing a down arrow, it should actually show a smiley face or something. Because otherwise, if you read the report, it isn't clear.
Are you okay with that approach, everybody?
We also had Councillor Morby's point around ensuring the scrutiny chairs take this forward then with the individual executive members. Was there a view going back to Councillor Rees's point on expert witnesses?
Well, I would just like to say it might be helpful if we had Richard Edmonds, equivalent, let's say, from Caerphilly, to come down and challenge whether our performance measures are actually in line with the way that we may be going in the future.
Well, I think if you take up the suggestion that the 5 scrutiny chairs seek a meeting with the executive, the cabinet basically, in order to discuss what we've been talking about, how to improve the system as well as the particular points, then that can be raised in the same context, can't it? Wouldn't it be a good idea to get somebody in, as Jeff suggested, and on a reciprocal basis? So realistically, those things aren't going to change unless we engage the executive to get the change. And I think what I'm suggesting is that the 5 chairs are the best place to do that. And you can only ask. If they don't want to see you, well...
They would have much choice, I don't think. Agree with that? Thank you. That's a good recommendation, I think. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Anything else at all? Anybody, any burning issues? Great. So that's the recommendations, and what we would do is email back those suggestions. So if you've got any bits you don't like, you can obviously go back to Tom and Bex about that, and see what you think about it, and we can correct it. And we've got the recommendations. Thank you very much for attending. I know it's not exactly and we've got in before 4 o'clock, which I said we would. Note. And thank you very much for attending, and see you next one of these.
I'd like to give a vote of thanks to the Chair. I thought he done very well.